This podcast is made possible in part through a partnership with TrueFire. TrueFire is the most comprehensive guitar learning experience on the internet, with over 51,000 guitar lessons from the best educators in the world. It makes TrueFire the #1 most trusted music education resource for guitar players. We as guitar players sometimes get fixated on the gear that we play and we neglect the skill level that we play. And many of us have a hard time finding instructors locally. TrueFire bridges that gap. You can find my affiliate link below to get 40% off with my code 40watt of your first purchase through TrueFire. Learn, practice, play TrueFire. This podcast is made possible by the support of many wonderful people over on Patreon. If you would like to support this show and help make sure it keeps going, you can go over to patreon.com/40wattpodcast, where for as little as $3 a month, you can help make sure this show keeps happening. Thank you for all of your support. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the 40 Watt Podcast. I genuinely can't tell you what number we know we're in season 3. I'm sorry, I'm a musician. I count to 4, and that's where I stop. So I think I've actually used that joke before, and I'm really sorry if you've heard it. So we're back. Really excited to get into this episode, but I'm going to cover a couple of things. Like last week, I covered thanking my Patreon supporters at the top of the episode rather than the end of the episode, because by the end of the episode, I've forgotten to do it, and that's just who I am as a person. Y'all know my ADHD and the way this works. So, going to thank all of my current Patreon supporters very, very much for their support, and I'm going to name you out by name as soon as I find it. There we go. Thank you, Bradley Jones, Jordan Glash, Duncan Watson, Andy Johns, David Evangelista from the Guitar Dads podcast, Blake Jefferson, Nick Call, Andrew Hensley, Alan Gresham, Dan Pilver of Lewitt Audio, Scott Hamilton of the Effects Loop podcast, Andy Koning, Jim Burns, Tom Kelly, Heath Batt, Ben Fair of Electromotive Sound Company, Rick Calhoun of Honey Picks, Jeffrey Walks, and Kyle Harris. I hope all of you are enjoying your care package I sent you with some stickers, button, a 40-watt pin, even some custom 40-watt Honey Picks, if I can get that to focus. These are super rad. I'm super excited about them. Yeah, I like these a bunch. I got a few more, so hopefully some of y'all will be sticking around for a full year or more as well. Though those went out to those of you that have been with me for 12 months or more consecutively, so I greatly appreciate it. All right, there we go. That's the shilling at the top of the show that I'm done. So on this episode, super excited to have John Snyder from... John, I'm going to let you say the name of the company because I have said this 3 times out loud today and I transpose words on it. So I'm going to let you say it.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm John from Electronic Audio Experiments, a company
That's
I would
it.
have named differently if I knew I was going to do this for a living.
Yeah, because I have definitely said audio electronic, or the experiments always stays at the end, but I keep transposing it. So I didn't want to mess it up, but it's EAE. That's the acronym I see everybody talk about when they talk about your pedals.
Much easier to just go off the acronym.
Yeah. So I'm a giant nerd, like phenomenally huge nerd, and I'm sure that all of my regular listeners know this. I'm a big old like fantasy D&D nerd, like hardcore. And so I remember the first time I saw the longsword, and I was like, these are my people. I don't own one right now, and I think I looked and that the longsword wasn't available right now. Is that right?
Yeah, they're despite our best efforts, still a little hard to get these days.
Yeah, I get it. So, but I remember seeing those pedals, and then when I started messaging you trying to get you on the podcast, I was super excited because, I mean, again, it's my people. So let's back up though before we dive into the super nerdy stuff. Let's dive back into how'd you get into guitar, how'd you get into music, and how'd you get into deciding you wanted to be a lunatic and start a pedal company.
Yeah, so I grew up in a very musical household. My parents, I have so many different kinds of music. It was the Beatles, it was musicals, it was classic rock, it was classical music. A lot of classical music in my house growing up.
Okay.
Um, and my folks wanted us to play an instrument that would kind of help us succeed or whatever. So at age 6, I started playing the violin. My brother was started piano at the same time. He was age 4. and we were doing Suzuki methods. It was all learning by
Mm,
ear, and it was just a really it was a great way to get started because when you're a little kid, you don't want to read sheet music or anything. You just need somebody to tell you how to hold the instrument the right way, and then you're off to the races. And so it definitely inspired this this kind of like playful like sort of exploratory approach to musical instruments, which once private lessons and orchestras and quartets and stuff like that ramp up, it's pretty hardcore. It's like, oh well, there's this pressure to like you have to do a really good job at this so you can go to college. It's the
yeah.
classic millennial dilemma, right? And for me, I to kind of blow off steam, I also picked up electric guitar, and I was like, well, I was age 13. I really
Yeah.
wanted girls to like me. And I was just like a skinny little nerd with like a Napoleon Dynamite haircut, to paint a picture for you. Um, and my favorite thing to do was Lego robotics. So I really needed to like,
You were
to
super popular.
to get the D&D stuff going early, I needed to put some points into charisma, and you know, um, and so, I started teaching myself guitar, and I thought, oh well, it can't be that hard, right? I mean, it's got strings. I don't have to worry about
Yeah.
being in tune. There's frets. There's no bow to worry about. And so the first time I picked up a guitar, I tried tuning it like a violin because I thought this was going to be a cheat code, and I immediately snapped the high E string, cut my hand, and I was like, well, this is dumb. And so, this was like me borrowing one from my buddy for a while, and I ended up coming back around to it because my younger brother had gotten one as a birthday present, and I was actually the first one to play it because to surprise him, we decided that we would. He was a really heavy sleeper, so you might be able to see where this is going. We set
Yeah.
up the amp next to his bed, plugged in the guitar. I turned all the knobs on the amp all the way up. I turned the amp all the way up, and then I just slammed. I didn't know any chords, so I just hit all the open strings. So it's just that open string guitar sound. And he
Yeah.
shot out of bed like a rocket. And then ever since, I was like, oh, I like noise rock now. Um, and so I was, like he actually was like he had first dibs on the guitar, and he like learned a bunch of Beatles songs and got bored with it. My brother's one of those people uh who gets really really good at things in intense phases for like 6 months at a time, and then
Right.
he just drops it. Um,
Oh,
so
yeah.
so then I was like, oh, it's my turn to play the guitar now, for real. And so I learned, Blink 182 Fall Out Boy songs, like stuff that, someone who was in middle school and high school in the 2000s would be getting into. So, because I was also a nerd in other facets, I realized, oh, well, I'm drawn to guitar because there's like stuff that you plug in. There are knobs that you turn. If you break it and take it apart, there's wires inside. And this was great because, I was the kind of kid who was, taking apart VCRs and stuff when I was little.
Right.
And so,
Oh, for those of you Zennials, VCRs were these devices that played a cassette tape this big or so. You put it in, and it showed movies magically. All of the distortion and fuzziness was just, that was a fringe benefit.
mhm, it's true. Now you can just get a pedal that does that. We don't need VCRs anymore.
It's true. I have one. the
Me
gen
too.
the gen loss.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like it all kind of in retrospect feels like a very natural evolution of stuff I was getting into. Um, but I didn't really, so I would do things like pickup swaps and stuff like that.
Sure.
I was like retubing amps. I was doing like light mods to things. Like I remember the first time I ever like cut the bright cap out of an amp. It felt like my friends and I felt like we were doing open heart surgery. Um, and so so when I was in, fast forward a little bit, when I was in my senior year of high school and college, I was doing like a summer internship at this local manufacturing company. And their primary output was industrial joysticks. So, it was, basically like a joystick with a circuit board attached to it. So there would usually be some sort of mechanical configuration, or, some sensors or something, and then a circuit board with a bunch of junk on it. It's funny because at the time I didn't know any electronics. Nowadays, I could look at one of those schematics and tell you exactly what it was doing, but I don't have access to that anymore, so I can only guess. But
Right.
I learned how to work in a manufacturing floor. I learned how to solder. I learned how to stuff circuit boards. I learned a little bit of like PCB layout, that kind of thing. Um, and but they also kind of encouraged me to take parts out of the trash can. And so there I was, like, at the end of the day, just kind of like scrounging around to the engineering junk. And eventually amassed enough parts to build myself a clone of the ZVEX Super Hard On, which is a classic DIY circuit. The only
It
off the
is.
shelf parts I had to order were the enclosure, the jacks, and the foot switch. And this must have been in like, gosh, this must have been like 2009, 2010, maybe 2011.
Okay.
But at the time, like there wasn't really the infrastructure of stuff there is today, and so like the foot switch was like $12. It was like crazy
Right.
expensive. Because this stuff just wasn't what it is today.
And you didn't have access at the time, like online to wholesalers. Like now, we
Exactly.
can just go online and find a wholesaler and they'll
Hmm.
sell to anybody. You had to find, like the second or third hand down the
Yeah.
line guy selling it.
Yeah, we basically just had Small Bear Electronics, who,
Yeah.
fast forward today, are we're subletting from. So it's kind of wild how that
Hmm.
works out.
Yeah.
Where they're downstairs from us, but so I put together this pedal, and it worked, and it made my guitar sound better, and I was kind of hooked at that point. And so I had done other, like, some kind of ill-advised mods to things, and I was hacking up a lot of stuff.
Right.
Eventually I got into Mad Bean pedals, who are like a very classic DIY outfit, and I used like a few of their boards to build sort of like tweak clones of classic stuff. I build like a tube screamer with a diode switch for a bandmate, that kind of thing. um, and so that was kind of my like side thing when I was in college. And me and my friend Matt, who eventually went to go work as the like lead designer at Adventure Audio for a number of years. We had a company that was called Beer Money Pedals, because we thought, well, you sure can get a lot of beer money if you're doing this. But we spent the entire time trying to simulate a Boss HM2 clone, only for it not to work. So we didn't get very
Oh, no.
far, but the intent was there. Like, I knew I wanted to get into this. And so I was doing like clone builds for friends, just to like, and bandmates and stuff, through college. And I also kind of had the reputation as like the guy in the band who knows stuff about gear. I was playing in bands around this time, and I learned a lot of things about how to make a guitar sound good live, or in the studio. Um,
Hmm.
and it's stuff that I still take with me today. I didn't fully know what I was doing at the time, but even just drawing on those memories and experiences of playing in bands, really was helpful. So I was playing in this like loud kind of, like post-hardcore band. It was called Native Wildlife. We were not very good, but we had our moments. And I got to tour a little bit, made a lot of friends, people who I still, am in touch with today, which is a really valuable thing. Um, and so then once that band chilled out, I graduated college. I moved back home for about a year to like try to pay down some of my student loans. Again, classic millennial
Yeah.
experience. And
Yep.
so I was like long distance with my now wife. Um, I had a lot of free time in my hands. I had a little bit more disposable income because I wasn't paying rent to live with my folks, which was really nice. And
Hmm.
so I just started, buying more pedal kits and stuff like that, and learning a little bit more. I bought myself like a nice soldering iron and all these things. And it kind of laid the groundwork. Like, I knew I wanted to make an original design, but I didn't quite have the know how to do it. I went to my undergrad was in physics, so it was a lot of very heady stuff. It was a lot of math, not a lot of
Yeah.
hands on. Um, but I did take one electrical engineering course my senior year, just to like see what the big deal was, and I was like, "Uh oh, I should have been doing this the whole time." Um, as much as I liked the sort of headiness of all the physics stuff I was learning, I realized I liked the hands-on practical stuff more. And also, I'd been burned out
Sure.
on like a few years of hardcore math. So, so I actually went back to school for electrical engineering. And so, when I and the first semester was like a breath of fresh air because it was all this practical stuff. The
Yeah.
second semester was a winter that people in Boston sometimes refer to. Actually, I don't know if this is just me and my friends or whatever, but we call it the snowpocalypse, because Boston got about 120 inches of snow that winter. And I lived
That
in
sounds terrible.
oh, it was
As a
something.
Mississippi kid, like that sounds like my very special hell.
Oh yeah, I
That's
mean it was, so I lived on top of a hill in a basement apartment. So getting on and off the hill with all this snow was an enormous undertaking. And then getting into and out of the basement was a entirely separate undertaking. So, my friends and I, we would like, there was literally one time where we took a sled down to the hill, because at the bottom of the hill, there was a 7-Eleven and a liquor store. And we would just, we just loaded this up with like frozen pizzas and beer, and just like dragged it back up the hill because no one wanted to go anywhere. And so, I mean, this was an amount of snow that in Boston I was having classes not just like postponed or anything like that, but outright canceled. Nowadays
Oh,
it would have just been, no, do it remote. But like, I had a
yeah.
lot of free time on my hands, and so we were playing video games. I was playing guitar, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna design that pedal I've been wanting to do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so I got started on it. Like, I had learned just enough electronics, and I was able to say, okay, I want to put these gain stages, and I'm going to start by borrowing this EQ from this amp that I like, and I'm going to tweak it a bunch. And I learned how to use a circuit simulator like for real. And the result was the Longsword version 1. Um, and at the time, I was getting some pretty good advice from my friend Nicholas Williams, who used to run the company Dunwich Amps.
Okay.
He definitely, I really looked up to him because I loved that he was making amps. I loved that he was doing pedals. For a while, I actually thought I was going to be doing amps and not pedals. Um, and so, but I had this pedal idea. I built my first tube amp like this semester because I had all this extra free time from all of the canceled classes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I was actually able to like put in real time into self study just enough to get myself off the ground. And at that point, it was like I had fully fallen in love with this stuff. And so it wasn't much longer after the longsword came out that I designed the Model FET. And then after that, it was just like one thing after another, just always crammed in the edges. Obviously, school picked back up and took a lot of my time. So production was
Sure.
very stop start. Um, but I really, it became like a real thing. And so where the name came from originally, when I was doing this, I had a blog called Electronic Audio Experiments, and that was where I was documenting my electronic audio experiments. The pedals I built for friends, the modifications I was doing, the tube amp repair, like that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
when I did the first run of longswords, I was like, well, how do I identify this? I guess it's just going to be the title of the blog, and that's where it came from. But the first longswords actually just had, it was, I made like a stencil out of cardboard and used like a paint marker to draw a sword on it. I'm fairly sure that of the ones that are remaining, none of them have the paint still on them, so that's just in this like purple enclosure. It's better that way. They looked terrible, but people bought them. People thought that what I was doing was just interesting enough to take a chance on it. And without
Yeah.
those 15 or so people, I mean, like, who knows what I'd be doing? Um, and I think about that a lot. So,
Yeah.
so when I was progressing through school, I was, I was doing batches of pedals. I eventually enlisted the help of my friend Brad, who's now like my like right hand guy, general manager at the shop. And because he used to live down the street from me. We were
Okay.
introduced because I needed to borrow a drill press I was working on something. I was in the middle of a move and I needed a drill press. I don't even know what it was. But someone was like, "How do you not know Brad? He lives in your neighborhood." And so I walked over there, and I was there for like 2 hours because we were just shooting the shit the whole time. Like it was like we were just, we were friends already. And we didn't know it.
Right.
And so then he was able to help me out with building, and I could, what little time I had, I could use to design stuff and run social media and do all answer emails. Not a lot has changed really. I think he's still the one who does so much of the actual like nuts and bolts assembly stuff, and I feel like my job is answering emails so that he has parts to build the stuff. Um, but
Mm-hmm.
but he really makes the whole thing go around. So that worked out pretty well for a couple of years. The releases got more ambitious, and we started to attract a bit of a following. Getting to the point where it was like, oh, this is this is a brand that people are excited about. There's sort of lingering demand for pedals. It used to be I would have to build 15 of something on a Saturday, and that was
Right.
enough. And then it was like, oh, we have to do 30, and then 50, and then maybe 100 pedals at a time. And building 100 pedals at a time is an undertaking if it's your part-time job. I was at the point where I was having a bunch of friends over, and we would order a pizza and sit around my dining room table, and everyone would build pedals, and that was pretty
See,
fun.
this is the part where earlier I said, what made you like what lunatic idea did you have to start a pedal company? This is the
Yeah.
point where this is the lunacy part of it.
Yes.
This is the
Yep.
insanity, pure insanity.
And eventually it's like, oh, this thing is sustaining itself. I could have said, oh, well, I'm going to go get a real job and this thing
Mm-hmm.
and open source all these designs and then just design for the love of designing, which I strongly considered. And then this little thing called the pandemic happened. And so I So I've been trudging through grad school. It was an extremely difficult time for me. I was on a project that, by all accounts, I think was really not impossible, but effectively impossible.
Sure.
With the resources that I had, with the support that I had, it was a small research group. What I was doing was really, really niche. So it's not like there were a lot of people I could talk to. I was spending hours and hours and hours in a clean room, sometimes working like, late nights, sometimes working overnight because a lot of clean room stuff you'd book on a shared calendar. And sometimes the availability on a piece of popular equipment might only be at 2 in the morning. And it's like,
Right.
guess what? I'm going to sleep during the day. I'm going to go get on the bus, go to school, you know, uh, put on my bunny suit and get to work. And then it would be like a lot of these procedures would be like 30 minutes of really intense, like bench top tweezer work, followed by 5 hours of sitting there while the thing you put together sits in an oven. But you can't leave the oven. You've got to be there for it, right? And so I was
Right.
using that time to lay out circuit boards too. Worked out fairly well for me. But so it was like this weird stop start, like highly stressful periods interspersed with not so stressful, but still like this like lingering existential dread. Um and
Truly millennial right there.
oh yeah. And so for a while, we were waiting for this laser to come in. I needed this fancy laser to test the devices that I was making in the clean room. And the the laser showed up in February of 2020. So it landed. Literally, the company flew in a technician to help us install it and train us on it. This guy stayed in Boston for 2 full weeks helping us put it together, because this was probably a $250,000 laser. If I
Right.
were to guess, this was like the most serious piece of equipment I've ever used for any singular piece of equipment I've ever used for anything. And we get it all up and running. We're ready to rock. And March rolls around, and my advisor was like, "Things are looking a little weird. You might want to come up with a backup plan." And I was like, "Whatever." And obviously, we all know how that worked out. And so
Yeah.
I ended up basically writing my thesis was, here's what I would have done if I had the tools to do it. It was very speculative, but I was able to successfully defend it. I think that the end result was as good as it could have possibly been under the circumstances.
Right.
Um, and then I was like, time to go be burned out. I don't want to do this anymore. Um, and so this was May of 2020. So like we'd had a few months of being accustomed to working from home. There was actually a period where I was like kind of on standby, because if things opened back up early, I would have gone back to the lab. And so I had about a month where I was like just doing pedal stuff because there was nothing to do. And
Yeah.
that was actually kind of cool. And then I realized, okay, I got to get this thesis out the door. Let's focus on that. But I said, okay, I'm gonna give myself like a couple of months and do this pedal thing. I can make just enough money to squeak by, and then maybe I can offload everything to a contract manufacturer or sell the brand and then go get a quote unquote real job, right?
Right.
And that didn't happen. I realized I liked it. There was definitely a pedal boom. People were
There
excited about
was.
what we were doing. They were excited about the availability. And so after a year of in this room building pedals, and like I would get in my car and I would drive boxes of parts over to Brad's place, because he and his wife moved out of the city in like 2019. And I would then bring the finished pedals back here. And I would pack them up and ship them, drive them up to the post office up the street. And about after a year of that, I was like, wow, I'm really tired of all the dog hair in my packages. Let's go get a real shop. And so we did. I convinced Brad to quit his job, and
Wow.
the rest is history. And so we've got a couple other people at that location. During this time, I also partnered up with Hawker from Asheville Music Tools. So he and I do a lot of stuff together behind the scenes. The companies are kind of joined at the hip because he's taught me a lot of what I know about the more advanced analog circuit stuff, and I kind of helped him like get the business side off the ground of like, how do you set up e-commerce, and how do you run social media, like all this stuff that is not very glamorous, but also really essential to doing what we have to
How do you
do.
file your taxes as a
Oh
business?
yeah, it was a mess.
Oh,
I mean, there was a good several months of like back and forth, like getting all of those ducks in a row. And ideally you do it once and it's done, but like
right.
holy crap, it's a lot of work. So
Especially
uh
if you have zero idea how it's done. Like
oh
if you
yeah, oh
come
it's
from nothing of zero, you ground zero on it. It's all in Greek. You
mhm.
have no idea.
Yep. Yeah, it's miserable. I like designing circuits, and everything else I do, I am 100% faking it. And even sometimes with the circuit stuff, I feel like I'm faking it. But
Sure.
we do what we have to do. So that's the life story of EAE. That's the whole arc of it, from the basement apartment to having a real shop. Um, Pretty wild.
That's a big step when you as a pedal company or any builder, any company, go to like, oh, I need a dedicated physical space that's not my house.
Yes.
Because there's a lot of people that, there's a lot of very successful companies, they're still in that, they're in their house.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I can think of like, I literally think, of folks like Grant and Karen from Big Ear, they're still, they still do it from their home. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of folks that do it that way, because that's, to me, that's where things get real, and they also sort of get a little scary because you're
Oh,
like,
for sure.
oh, we're doing the thing.
The overhead
But there's
changes a lot too.
oh yeah, overhead changes big time. Is there a moment where you were like, where you sort of second guessed it? You were like, I don't know.
Every 2 or 3 weeks.
I okay, good. You are sane. I just needed to make sure. Um, yeah, I've said this to other pedal builders on the podcast, and I've had a bunch at this point, and I love talking to pedal builders because they're all lunatics.
It's true.
Um, with a few exceptions, like I mentioned, I've had Mike from Analog Man on the podcast, and like Mike got established way before there were 4 billion pedal companies. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
When when Mike established, there were a handful out there. Now the pedal boom, not just in those builders that already existed selling a bunch of pedals, you had a pedal boom of just pedal companies popping up out of nowhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and it's, I think it was like, what is it, effects database, right? Was adding like dozens of
Oh,
new
that's right.
companies a week for a
Yeah.
while. I mean, I get it. There are very few businesses that you can start with essentially zero overhead. Um, you know, you get a soldering iron, a domain name, um, and an Adobe Illustrator license. You can basically, you can probably get a dozen people to buy what you're selling.
Yeah.
You know, um, what do you do after that is anyone's guess, but that's something that has always been very appealing to this industry, is just how easy it is to get started, because it means that the friction for good ideas to come to life is minimal.
I was just having this conversation with a friend of mine. I've got a buddy of mine, Dean, that was in town. He had a gig nearby. He lives in Iowa, but he had a gig in Mississippi. He didn't want to drive down, but he also didn't want to fly with a guitar. So he was like, "Hey," I told him he could just crash here, and if he needed to borrow gear, I've got plenty of gear. He can just borrow some. Actually, as we speak, that gig is today. So I was talking to him yesterday about it, and I was like, he's not a big gearhead. He's not a big pedal head. He's not, he doesn't get into all this stuff. He knows some stuff exists, but like we just started pulling stuff off my pedal shelf. Like,
Hmm.
and I have, of like guitar, like YouTuber, podcaster space, I have a pretty modest amount of pedals, and I feel like I have too many. But he just like took a moment where he was like, there are so many different overdrives. I said, yeah. He said, how does anyone even sell one anymore? I said, you would be surprised. It's
Hmm.
like, it's the first thing people are willing to take a gamble on that you make. Is like, if you put out an overdrive, people are going to buy it, at least give it a shot.
Oh, absolutely.
It,
Yeah.
it's such a weird world to live in where, despite the 4 million options of overdrives, it truly is, how many overdrives is good for the market? N plus one.
Yeah, it really
It's like
feels that way
one more.
sometimes. And it's like
Yeah.
they're all the same and yet also different. Um, I
Yeah.
find that very fascinating. It's it's a very personal thing. Not to like, and it feels so aggrandizing to say that, but uh, everyone has their own version of that experience. Plugging into something that feels right or doesn't feel right, and then being like, okay, well, I'm going to put all five of these overdrive pedals on the ground and try them out, and damn it, they all feel different. They all sound different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if those differences are obfuscated in a band mix, because at the end of the day, the good one is going to change how you play. You're playing mind games with yourself. Um, but if at the end of, I don't know, art's all subjective anyway. So how far down does that rabbit hole go, right? At some point,
Yeah.
you just have to let it. You just have to accept it.
And in that same thing, it's like, I think Dan, not Dan, Mick from over on that pedal show once said, um, that sometimes the difference in sound is totally in our head. Like, everybody likes to make that argument, oh, they don't actually sound different. It's all in your
Mm,
head. And he's like, I hate to break it to you. Literally everything you experience on a daily basis is in your head.
this is true.
That's the only way you can experience it, is how your brain processes it. If you hear a difference, then by God, you hear a difference. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
I definitely had that experience where a buddy of mine loaned me a bunch of other overdrive pedals that I didn't already have, and like
Mm,
loaned me a bunch of them. It was Scott from the Effects Loop actually sent me home with a bunch of them to try that he had that I was really curious about, and I went plugged one after another into it, and I was like, it sounds like the one before, and
yeah.
plugged another, it sounds like the one before, plugged another, they all sound the same. The
Hmm.
place on the knobs maybe was different, but they all ultimately sounded the same. And I had this weird moment where it's like, do all of my overdrive pedals actually sound the same, and I somehow decide they sounded differently, and like I have an appeal to one over the other for obviously no good reason,
Hmm.
because I have, and not to get like listeners, not to get like super psychological and like heady about overdrive choice. This is the dumbest deep psychological conversation possible, but I have to have it. It's like this is me realizing how I feel
Hmm.
by talking it out. You can bill me for the psychologist hours later, John. But it's like I have great overdrives. I literally had two more overdrives show up to my house this week that I bought. It's like they do the thing that
Hmm.
the other thing did,
But
except
are they
they
cool though?
labeled the knobs differently. I don't know. I, I don't know. So that's my discussion about just the lunacy of the pedal industry that I love to talk about. We all love another new pedal.
It's true. We know what we signed up for.
Yeah, exactly. We know exactly what we signed up for. So let's talk a little bit about, because right now I went on your website today because I was curious. I was like, what's available? And
Hmm.
I've seen a bunch of these on people's pedal boards on Instagram, and the reason I feel really bad that I was like, I need you to say the name of your company, because literally anytime anyone has talked to me about your pedals, they just say EAE,
Sure.
EAE, and I was like, I forgot what they stood for a second there. Um, and I didn't want to get it wrong. And I would feel worse if I got it wrong rather than just asking. But I went on the website and I was like, man, there's a lot that's temporarily unavailable. So I have to ask, are you still experiencing some of the like backlog of supply that a lot of people were going through in not just post pandemic, but I think there was between the pandemic plus the conflict, literally the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, that's caused some pushback on some supply.
Hmm.
I take it you're still feeling some of that.
Yeah, I think things have definitely gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's often to just be really blunt about it. There's always this balance of like cash flow involved with these things.
Yes.
You know, uh, if like we're always trying to balance out supply and demand. I never want to have too much stuff sitting on the shelf because we can't really afford to. If the money required to build 50 extra pedals that we're not going to sell could go into R&D, I'm going to put that money into
Yeah.
R&D. Um, but yeah, we do have a lot of things that are back ordered. The killer, honestly, has been knobs. That's the one that has been by far the worst
Really?
these days. Our main knob supplier is like 18 months out. Um, and
Oh.
there's not much you can do about that, really, not right now. And there are a few like we really like our fancy parts.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not oh, I'm getting carbon comp resistors because they sweeten your tone or anything like that. Not to get into the physics of that, they do in only very select circumstances, and I can tell you about that
Sure.
some other time. But the like high quality audio op amps, for instance, or the chips that we use in power supplies. A lot of our pedals do 9 to 15 volts or 9 to 24 volts, or sometimes even 9 to plus minus 15, as is the case for a particular upcoming release. um,
Oh wow.
the parts to do that right are expensive. um,
Sure.
so there have been a few situations like that. We work with a contract manufacturer in the US who does our circuit boards. I like to be able to have a personal relationship with the vendors in that capacity, especially for
Mm-hmm.
something so sensitive as a circuit board that needs to be done right. For me to be able to call up the president of the company when I've got a question and actually be able to like level with her is really really nice. Globalization has brought a lot of good things, but also it can be harder to relate to people when they're in a different time zone or you haven't met them in person. When
Sure.
you are a tiny tiny pedal company, like I can't afford to get on a plane and go to China and talk to first of all, the big manufacturers there, we're not even doing 10% of the volume they would need to like play ball. So that's a whole other thing too.
Right.
But having that personal relationship is valuable. And so, but they're in a rural area, they have staffing issues, and so it can take some time to get stuff out. So all of this to say, yeah, there's still some supply chain issues. The nature of them has changed, and it's not as bad as it used to be. And also, like we have a very small operation, and we're doing a lot of stuff in parallel. So it's like we tend to kind of rotate through things. Like, for instance, we had a lot of long swords available 6 months ago,
Sure.
and we sold those. It took some time. Like it's funny, they were available for a while, and it was like they were kind of easy to get, and then so I was like, okay, demand's slowing down on these. I'm gonna, turn down the spigot a little bit. And
Uh-huh.
sure enough, it's coming right back around. And I'm really glad that something I designed in, 2015, is still exciting to people. I did
Yeah.
not expect that, and I continue to be surprised by it. Um, so it's like that's a good problem to have, but it is still a problem. And so yeah, we're
Right.
always kind of rotating between stuff. And then there are some models like the Obstructures line where like those enclosures are custom die cast. We order them a thousand pieces at a time or something like that, and they take a long time to show up. Like there we had an order of them sitting on a boat for like 4 months. Like it was just
Oh,
or
wow.
or on a boat or in port or something. So, we're always doing the best we can to balance it, but this is like honestly not my area of expertise. Like I just want to sit down and design stuff. So managing inventory is like it's like pulling teeth.
Isn't it terrible?
It
I
really it
I
really
don't like
is.
it.
We
I
do
used
we do what we can.
oh, I was gonna say I was assistant manager at a bar
Hmm.
for a while, and part of that was inventory management. And just inventory management at the bar
Hmm.
is awful because it's a constant guessing game. Like, okay, we have this many bottles of these liquors, we have this many bottles of this beer, we have all these things in stock. Do we have enough to get through this amount of time before we need to order more? And then you're assuming, like,
Yep.
who knows? There could be three frat groups in town that night who decided you're the bar they're going to, and oh well, shit, now we're
Hmm.
out of Jameson, or
Yeah.
now we're out of Jaeger, or
Yep.
whatever it is.
Yeah, and then it's like, and luckily luckily electronic parts don't have. Well, I mean they do sort of, but they don't really have a shelf life. Like you
Right.
It's so the worst thing that can happen is being on the hook for inventory you can't sell, but at least it's not going to go bad on the shelf.
Yeah,
That's a whole
exactly.
other dimension that I thankfully will never have to worry about. But
Yeah, don't do it. As much as I think pedal builders are lunatics, people who open restaurants are bigger lunatics. I,
yeah,
I don't get it.
can't live with them, can't live without them. Yeah,
That's exactly right.
another killer part, bucket brigade chips. That one,
I You're not the first to tell me that, so that's becoming a real issue.
oh yeah. Well, the problem is that there are two companies that make them.
Hmm.
One of them is owned by Behringer. I will not touch them. Period. I
Yeah,
cannot. That company is evil, and I'm not interested in supporting them. The other one makes a great product, but they, their lead times are something like 6 months, and the BBDs,
gotcha.
like MN 3005 BBDs, common analog delay part, those things are like $10 a pop. So if you want to build, and
Ooh,
usually there are 2 to 4 in an analog delay pedal. So if you
right.
want to
Because
put,
one only gives you what, like 350 milliseconds of
yeah,
delay,
yeah,
like at
pretty much.
most.
And so like, for one of the Asheville pedals, right, the special edition analog delay has 3 of them in it. So already $30 in chips alone.
Right.
And that's $30 in just the delay chips, not counting the op amps, the transistors, the logic stuff, the clock generator, the exponential converter, all of the CV processing. Like it goes on and on and on.
Yeah.
Like these things are wicked complicated. So, but to be hamstrung by one part like this is kind of brutal. And we're dealing with stuff like this like just constantly all the time. It's a juggling game, it really is. And I don't want to sound like I'm complaining or like I'm ungrateful. There are definitely some parts of this job that I would rather not deal with, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we get to make cool stuff for people who are then using it to make more cool stuff, which is very gratifying. When I find out
Yeah.
someone has, this thing that I've just crawled through broken glass to make into reality, is being used on a record or something like that. I mean, just today, actually, somebody sent me a link to a Tiny Desk concert where someone had used one of our pedals, and I was like, "Well, I'm never
Oh,
going to
that's
go to the
rad.
Tiny Desk." But I don't know if you listen to Bill Orcutt at all, but he did this. He does like a lot of he did like a guitar quartet record essentially, kind of
Yeah,
in
I watched
like a
that
Riz
one.
Chasem sort of the way. So Wendy Eisenberg, who's one of the guitar players, is friends with they're friends with the band Pile, and our technician Miranda is the front of house engineer for Pile. So through Pile, Wendy got interested in the longsword, and Miranda was able to hook them up with a longsword. And then they proceeded to use it for this run of shows, which is so cool because, like, you know, I don't think anytime soon I'm going to be in a band that plays on the Tiny Desk. I think the odds are like less than
Right.
0.1% that will ever happen to
Right.
me, and I'm okay. I made my peace with that. I make tools for artists. I'm making less art myself. Um, and so to see that happen is awesome. It is awesome. That's like the whole reason I do this. Obviously there's the joy in designing things, but then you want that thing you design to be used. That feels really really good.
Yeah. And listeners, if you haven't gone and heard that Tiny Desk concert, it's the Bill Orcutt Guitar Quartet.
It's
Um,
really good.
I'm I'm a pretty avid listener. I don't listen every time one comes out just because I time. I don't have that much time. I wish I did, but I try to as often as I can. And that concert with that Tiny Desk was wild.
Yeah.
The way they play, the way they orchestrate the guitars. Their guitars, they don't use all six strings.
Hmm.
Like that was immediately something I
Oh
noticed. They're
yeah.
strung oddly. Just you got to go watch it. I'm gonna link it down in the description. I'm gonna try to remember to do this. I don't have anything to write on in front of me, which is a complete and utter interviewer fail. I have nothing to write on in front of me. But I'm gonna try to remember to. If I don't remember it, just Google Bill Orcutt Guitar Quartet and Tiny Desk. You'll find it.
Yeah.
It's
And
really
then
cool.
look up what all the other guitarists in that quartet are doing on their own because they're all
Yeah,
incredible artists in their own right. So
yeah,
it's cool.
absolutely.
Pretty rare for a
Check
band
that
like
stuff
that
out.
to exist.
Yeah, I have been a massive fan of the Tiny Desk concert for a long time. I've actually toyed with the idea. Haven't done it yet. I've done something sort of small and similar. Because I work in libraries. Mentioned it before we started recording, and my listeners all know that I'm a public librarian. It's what I do for a living. And one of the things I want to do is a music series in the library of live original music and put it on YouTube and call it like Songs from the Stacks or something like that. And
Oh, you
and
should totally
just
do that.
yeah, and do like local artists. And the local can mean Mississippi, local could mean the South, whatever it is. And
Sure.
I think that's a really interesting way to showcase local music. I am completely envious of what NPR's done with the Tiny Desk series. I absolutely adore it. So if you for some reason you've been living under a rock and haven't checked out the Tiny Desk concert at all, um, one of my favorites was Tedeschi Trucks Band. How they fit that many people behind the desk, I have
Oh, I
no
don't know how to
idea.
do it.
Yeah, it's great. So building pedals, you're making these really cool things, and now that the long sword's a little harder to get a hold of, I kind of because I've been meaning to get one. Like it's one of
Hmm.
those things that I was like, literally was the first one of yours that I saw, and I was like, I didn't actually care what it sounded like. It's nerdy enough that I needed to have one. It's sort of like the first time I saw, and I've told the story on the podcast before. I had been a complete like blinders on to the gear industry,
Hmm.
for a long time because I had like, I know viewers, YouTube viewers, y'all can see this. There was a time in my life I owned two guitars and one amp and a small pedal board, and that was it. I gigged like 200 shows a year, whether they were big or small. That's what I did. Um, it was only when I stopped playing so much that I accumulated this many guitars.
Ain't that
But
just the way?
yeah, it's because you fill that gap. You feel
Hmm.
that emotional gap that hey, I'm not gigging anymore. I got to feel that musical expression. I'd buy more guitars. It's dumb. Anyway, I'm recovering in that I keep buying more guitars. So, but I got I discovered the Wampler Clarksdale, and I'm from Clarksdale,
Oh,
Mississippi,
nice.
and the pedal the town the pedal is named for, and I was like, there's a pedal named after my town, and that's when I started looking around and realized there are so many pedals I've never heard of now, and I discovered this big gear world, and um And so it's like when I saw the Clarksdale, I saw it because a buddy of mine was selling it without having any clue what it sounded like. I messaged him, said, I have to have that.
Amazing.
Like, I'm buying that from you. I don't know what it does. I have to have it. Same thing. That's what happened with the longsword. I was like, I'm going to need to buy this because I don't even know what it sounds like. Don't care. So I discovered that and so that was a complete tangent about how I'm going to get one eventually. So you mentioned the whole amp thing. Is that
Mhm.
something still you might consider? The amp world feels riskier now than ever.
Yes, especially with supply chain disruptions and tubes. It's definitely more and more expensive to build them. I have wrestled with this question a number of times over the years. I'm mired in so much pedal design work right
Hmm.
now. Like I tend to, the way so like I have like for real ADHD diagnosed. Like I
Yeah.
didn't get it from TikTok. You know, uh, and one of the ways it manifests is I tend to like sort of just do too much stuff in parallel, kind of jump around, and I kind of feel like a snake that ate like a way too big. I feel like a snake that ate a watermelon right now when it comes to
Right.
R&D. There's just so much stuff in parallel coming through. And I'm hoping that when a plurality of these projects are like out the door, I can reassess on this because I have, I think, 3 amp designs. Like I know what I want out of them. Obviously, I'm not going to make all of them, but I would love to actually sit down and refine the best idea into something. The problem is like the threshold for commercial viability for these things is like all over the place, and
Yeah.
the upfront investment is really difficult, and I don't know how you sell an amp for less than like $3,000 in this day and age without having pretty substantial economy of scale. Once you factor in like the chassis costs and the carpentry and the tolexing and the transformers and the tubes and like the much larger circuit board, and that stuff adds up. It's
Real
wild.
fast.
But man, I would love to do so. Like I had this amp design. There are exactly 2 that exist. It was called the
Okay.
Arcanist, um, and it was kind of
Already,
like
I'm
a.
already into it.
It was,
I don't even need to know what it sounds like. That's you're there.
it was kind of a like a it was sort of like a hybrid between like an orange OR120 and like a Vox AC30. Not that exciting, but
I don't know. I don't know anything else that has that.
well,
So,
it
I
was
mean,
like I guess more AC15. So
okay.
we were doing the like the pentode input stage thing, but then
Hmm.
that was going with a James tone stack, so shelving filters, and then into like a big bottle like KT88 output stage. And there are a couple of tips and tricks on it. Um, Turns out like so the like I said, there are 2 that exist. I did actually have one friend who paid me to do like a fully custom build of it, and about 3/4 of the way through, I was like, never again, not like this. I think that there are lots of companies that are succeeding in this space. The 2 that I know the best and can speak to why they're succeeding are Science Amps
Uh-huh.
out of Seattle, and it's because Alex has optimized everything perfectly. Like just truly like he gets like a universal chassis with all the holes punched in it for all of his different amp models, and then he designs around those, right?
Sure.
Lots of little touches like that that make it feasible for him to say, okay, I might offer 4 or 5 different amp models, but the same chassis is for all of them, and I can build a 50 watt, 100 watt, or 200 watt version of the amp on this same chassis just by covering and uncovering different holes. It's
Yeah.
brilliant. And
That's what Dr. Z does, by the way.
oh,
Dr.
nice.
Z,
Well, there you
his
go.
I used to have a Maz 18,
Hmm.
and when I had it, and this is like early 2000s, I had a Maz 18, and I noticed when I retubed it for the first time, which listeners, I did the thing all of you have probably done. I definitely retubed it before it actually needed a retube. I convinced myself somehow I needed to retube this thing. I noticed there were extra holes in the chassis, and when I emailed Dr. Z about it, said, yeah, it's the same chassis we use for like the Mass 38 and the
Yeah.
whatever. And it's like we just use whatever holes are needed.
Yep. So I think like stuff like that goes a really long way.
Hmm.
If you haven't played a Science amp, they're amazing. I am biased because I own a Mother, which is kind of his take on the high watt sound, but with a
Okay.
drive channel that is unbelievable. Just a really phenomenal amp all around.
I I've seen them, but I've seen them online, but I've
Hmm.
never played one. They have a very distinctive look, which I feel like in
Yes.
the amp world is very hard.
Yep.
It's hard to be distinctive and attractive,
Yes.
like in the amp world. Pedal world is a little easier. Like you can be really creative with your artwork in a
Hmm.
pedal. Um, Amps, they kind of have to, I don't know, they've got to be kind of throwback, but not quite.
Right.
I think of it like a guitar maker trying to design their headstock. I
Hmm.
could not imagine trying to design a headstock.
Oh yeah, that's an impossible task. It feels like, but
Yeah.
and yet people keep on doing it. So luckily, I'm
And
not one
doing
of
very
them.
poorly, some of them. I'm not naming names.
um, Yeah, so I think so. Science Sam's is an example that does it right. I think that that Benson is another one that's doing it right.
Hmm.
If I can get my grubby mitts on a Benson anytime soon, I will be doing so. But and I think it's just because they are extraordinarily well dialed in. Like you just cannot get a
Yeah.
bad sound out of a Benson. But also he tends to splurge where it counts.
Hmm.
So he gets his Transformers done by Brian Sowers, who used to have a company. Well, not used to. He still has a company called Sour Sound, and he was making amps
Yep.
that were impeccable, some of the best ever. But he is, with all the love of my heart, a perfectionist to his own detriment, and hyper fixated on Transformers to the point where he's, I would say, one of the world experts in tube amp Transformers, because he knows not just how to wind a transformer, but he knows about the material science of the core materials, and also things like really esoteric stuff like the laminate materials. And if you want a dissertation on how laminate materials and transformers have evolved pre and post the invention of Captain Tape, and for about an hour, you can talk to Brian Sowers about it. But so Bensons have those transformers in them, and
Yeah.
because they're made with manufacturing techniques that are appropriate to various eras of tube amp design, um, they sound noticeably different. And it's crazy how much this stuff matters. But when you're dumping hundreds of volts into a piece of metal, like a transformer, the characteristics of that metal do greatly impact the sound. So I love stuff like that. And I think
Yeah.
so. Those are two amp people who are killing it. Sorry, what were you gonna say?
I was going to mention with Brian, he was on an episode of Truth About Vintage Amps with
Hmm.
Jason Verlinde at Fretboard Journal and Skip Simmons. And I listened to that episode that he was on, and I understood about a quarter of what he said. But he absolutely made me a believer in how I was always a believer that Transformers matter.
Hmm.
Like as a vintage Fender amp lover, I'm a big believer in those vintage amps.
Hmm.
I want I'm gonna do yeah. You're talking about the diagnosed ADHD. Mine's very recently
Hmm.
diagnosed, and so it's like
Congrats.
I'm discovering. Well, yeah, I'm discovering all these things I do and recognizing them now as, oh, that's that. That's why I think that way. Anyway, again, rabbit trail.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely.
so there was an ad recently I saw for a vintage. It was a vintage Fender amp, and the ad copy that the guy was trying to sell it on like Facebook Marketplace. He said Transformer upgraded with. I was like hell, you upgraded that Transformer. There's no upgrade for that
Yeah.
Transformer.
Yeah.
There's a replacement.
Hmm.
You replaced that
It's
Transformer
true.
anyway. But so I've always been a believer, but Brian made it sound like alchemy.
Hmm.
He makes it sound like absolute downright witchcraft, like the
Yeah.
way you have to go into thinking about Transformers and the effect they have. And
Hmm.
I absolutely believe it. But it's also, I'm really glad there's people like Brian out there doing the digging and research so I don't have to.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's such a multi-parameter space. To understand it, you really have to devote your all of your brain power to it.
Yeah.
And so, because of that, now his gifts are being applied to other companies, and for that, we're all very grateful because those amps sound really good. But so I think Benson was one of the first companies to get hit to those transformers, and it shows in their quality. So all this to say, if I ever get into the tube amp game, I have to be able to do it as good as these guys are doing it. Otherwise, it's not worth
That's a
it, because
standard.
I have to. Otherwise, I would just buy one of their amps, and this informs all the stuff that I make. Like if I make something, it's because I believe that thing. Either I try to make something that just hasn't been done before. Like a good example of this is our Dude Incredible pedal. The
I was going to ask you about that one.
Yeah. So the basic idea there was, I saw Shellac live, was absolutely flabbergasted by their guitar tone, and I wanted to replicate it. Couldn't get an Intersound IVP, and I said, well, can't get the rack unit, but I can get the service manual, so I'm going to make one, and see what happens. I was then eventually able to borrow one from a friend, compare
Hmm.
for accuracy, but we were the first ones to make a pedal out of it. And at the time, I remember being shocked because it sounded so good. I was like, surely somebody has thought to make this thing into a pedal, and nobody
Yeah.
did. And that's always a good feeling to be like to be shocked that somebody has not done something and have the freedom to be the first one to do that is like that's a good feeling. And so but because I made that, it did, my needs were not being met by an existing product, right? And
Yeah.
so that's what I went for. Or another example like the Halberd, right, is our discrete transistor overdrive.
Yeah.
I tried so many of these. There's definitely a sound that is somewhere between like a Neve console and like a fuzz face with your volume knob rolled back and like a few other things, and they're all great sounds in their own right. But it's very hard to get them to sound good at very low gain and very high gain. Typically, the ones that sound good at low gain don't have any. They don't sound good when you crank them up, and the ones that sound good
Right.
at high gain, if you dial them back, it has that kind of like fizzy, like spitty, ugly thing on the note decay. And
Yeah.
I spent 18 months trying to get that ugly note decay out of the circuit. And I think we only barely succeeded at that. Like if you run it into a twin, you can kind of still hear that kind of like crumbliness.
Yeah.
But like that was all I wanted out of that thing. And no other pedal that I bought could do it. I tried so many different pedals and I just wanted it to achieve this specific thing. Um, so that informs everything we do. So if I make a pedal, it's because I feel like my needs have not been met by something else on the market. Otherwise, I'm lazy. I'm just going to go buy the thing that does it right.
Right. It makes sense. And that's the thing I've always wondered about builders when they build something that isn't at least, I don't want to say an advancement, or at least
Hmm.
a variation on something that exists, because there are a lot of pedal companies that are just building exactly what was available before.
Yes.
Just they put it in a different housing. I use like to use the what I like to see is I use the Analog Man Sun Face as an example.
Hmm.
Yes, it's a fuzz face, but go buy a fuzz face and put it in the multi scenarios that you might want to put a fuzz in, where maybe you had to have some pedals before it, or
Hmm.
you got to put it after it, or you actually need to power it on your pedal board and not
Yep.
run it on battery. The way Mike builds those, it to me it perfected the fuzz face for the modern player.
Yeah.
So
Also, at
that's
the
what I want to see.
at the time
Okay.
he did it too,
Yeah.
there were no other options.
Yeah.
To for someone to modernize one of these effects was essentially unheard of at the time. And so
Yeah.
he found his, he did, I like to think I did with the IVP what he did with that stuff, where it was like
Yeah.
this thing's out there. It's not in a practical form for the modern player. Go get it. Like make this thing, give this thing a second life in a different format. Um,
Yeah.
so
That's
I think
what well,
that's
I was
really
gonna say,
cool.
that's what I think about uh the this is my brain absolutely blanking on the Dude Incredible. I keep wanting to call it the Dude Perfect, which is like a YouTube channel where they do trick shots.
Oh
The
yeah.
Dude Incredible. Yeah, it's so Dude Perfect. I'm like, it's a totally different thing.
Hmm.
Um the Dude Incredible, what caught my attention in it was not even the IVP, it was the harmonic percolator side of it.
Hmm.
Because there's not a lot of folks making a harmonic percolator still to this day.
Yeah,
I
it's
have one that Brainia effects. You're familiar with Eric Brainia?
no, I'm not
Um,
familiar.
he's out of California. He builds as a side job. That's his
Hmm.
side gig. He occasionally builds things for fun. He loves working with germanium. He finds like weird germanium, and so I've got several of his stuff. We've become friends over the years, and I've got one of his harmonic percolator style builds. And like
Hmm.
because I could not find one anywhere, and
Yeah,
I just not gonna pay for the original unit how much they're going for.
for sure.
So that's how I discovered that one. The Dude Incredible. It's like I was like,
Hmm.
oh, there's a harmonic percolator.
Yeah, I think that so we did the first Dude Incredibles in I think 2017 or 2018, and at the
Hmm.
time there were very few percolators on the market. Like it was
Yeah,
definitely a known quantity, but there are a lot more now.
yeah,
Like I
there are
think
more now.
we would not have released. I think that well, part of it also is the combination of the IVP and percolator is very strongly associated with Steve Albini's guitar sound.
Yes.
So to have that combination, it's one of those like greater than the sum of its parts kind of things. And so we smush them together in one box, and it's deceptively versatile. So like it's not just for noise rock, though. It does obviously it's very fun if you just crank the whole thing and get your howling walls of feedback. But uh, it's also nice as like a very light preamp EQ thing, and then using the percolator as a more chilled out drive. They pair together really well. So.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I like the percolator on that lower gain
Hmm.
stage thing. It just, I don't know, it does that thing to your sound. The as the guitar nerds call the make gooderer. It
Hmm.
just, it just takes your sound and gives you that little bit of extra, like, insert really overused guitar metaphor here. Sparkly, present,
Hmm.
forward, whatever you want to say, that it gives it that little bit of extra magic that I like a lot. It makes it a little less flat
Yeah,
feeling.
for
How many
sure.
cliches can I work into this description? I'm really, really trying here. Um, but yeah, so that's why I really like that one exists. And the IVP, because of the fact that you guys are first to do it, I've never played through one. I genuinely have no idea
Hmm.
how it would work. So I find that really interesting. I like that there is someone out there doing that, and you're doing new and exciting things. And like you just said, you have something else on the, which we obviously can't talk about. Maybe on a later episode, we'll talk again about the thing that's coming out.
Well,
But
let's see. Depends on which thing is coming out. So, uh, is this episode coming out?
this will come out. So as we're recording this, listeners, I'll just go ahead and tell you this is coming out. We're recording on May 18th. This episode will actually come out May 25th.
All right. Oh, this is perfect then. So we have a new
Oh,
pedal coming out a week from tomorrow,
oh,
on the 23rd. It is a new installment in the Obstructures collab line that we've been doing. Um, so we make a pedal called the OX EAE Boost, the
yes.
Obstructures and EAE Boost, and it's in this like actually I've got one on handy.
Oh, perfect.
All right, so here it is. There's my
Uh huh.
webcam. It's in this like really imposing like neo brutalist enclosure. The Obstructures guys designed this, and I had to make a circuit that was worthy of the look and feel of this thing. Um, they also make incredible guitars for what it's worth. I have one, and it's kind of sounds like a telly on meth. It's very aggressive, and it also weighs 12 pounds. It's very heavy.
Oh,
It's a great guitar. So all that to say, um, the so yeah, so the so we've got a fuzz coming out in this line.
uh
We
huh.
wanted to make something that built on this in a more extreme direction. So it is basically I wanted to make the filthiest gain stage I possibly could with the tools that I had available to me. So it's about 80 dB of gain if you're not doing anything else.
Oh,
Which is just unconscionable. It's unfiltered gain if you want it to be. So like it just completely is destroying your signal. And then there are two more sliders. There's obviously a gain and level slider. There is a slider called weight, which is the high pass. It's an input high pass filter, and you're changing the cutoff. So
okay.
at the minimum setting, you're cutting a bunch of bass at the input. It makes it very tight, almost a metal tone, but it's got a bit of this like sizzly edge that is not very modern metal, but like it will do that like tight palm mute thing. And as you turn it up, the transients get slower and slower and squishier until it's like a full like blown out wall of fuzz. So that's really fun.
Now you're talking.
And then there's a fourth slider called texture, which blends in an analog octave up at the input of the circuit. We do so. That's a fairly popular concept. You think about pedals like like the life pedal, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
foot switchable octave at the input of that. But we're doing the octave up in a way that I haven't seen in a lot of pedals. It's using a circuit called a precision rectifier, which essentially is it's a more mathematically perfect octave up. So the way that these things work is, you think of a sine wave as going back and forth. And if you
Yeah.
take the bottom half of the sine wave and flip it up to the top half, it looks like a wave that is twice the frequency because the bottom half is instead of it going up and then down, it's up, 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 right? And so it kind
Yeah.
of looks like a
Okay.
weird, it looks like a weird sine wave of twice the frequency. And but what's really cool is that if you put in like a fifth, for instance, you get other combinations of frequencies. So like a fifth actually gives you a sub octave. A third gives you like an octave and a fifth down. I think I did the math for this earlier today because I'm writing the manual, but it does some truly wacky stuff. And it's what gives you that like when you play if you play like a third on like a super fuzz and you
Yeah.
bend it, you hear that other note that goes like that like dive bombs down. That's
Yeah.
the math of this thing, not being a perfect upper octave. So we really
Yeah.
exploited that, and so basically it's just like the filthiest octave fuzz I could possibly come up with, and it's in this format. It's built like a tank. It's indestructible. It's loud as all hell. And I've been using it in my band So I'm really excited for other people to hear it because for me, it was like I really like octave fuzzes, but most of them that I played, when you kick them on, you disappear from the mix. And so for this one, I really,
Yes.
like, and not even the ones that have like a mid scoop. Like I have a small sound, big sound buzz, right?
Uh-huh.
And I love that pedal. It sounds like like a monster truck. But even with the mid scoop switch, like the mid scoop setting sounds amazing until you try to play in a band mix. Like it's good for guitar parts where it's like just a guitar riff and then the whole band comes in. That's when you use
Right.
the mid scoop. But otherwise, it's like you just don't get anything in a mix. But even in the the mid scoop offsetting, all of those overtones kind of like mush out your guitar tone.
Gotcha.
And so I wanted the upper octave to be blendable as kind of like it's like an afterburner, like you just kind of are adding in this extra bit of sizzle. So that's coming out next Friday. Very, very excited about that one. I think I hope that this one will be people will actually be able to get their hands on them. I think we made enough of them. That's also part of why we haven't had long swords because we've been busy building these things. And
Sure.
this product line is a little more intensive on the hand building side. Like there's more stuff wired off board. It's like, more uh it's just more it's kind of just ruggedized in a lot of ways. People use
Yeah.
mil spec for this stuff a lot of the time. And I have to laugh because like I'm pretty sure the military just does stuff at like the lowest possible bidder, you know. So I'm like, that's not how we build these things. We build them like we care. Um,
I think when they say military spec, they mean like old school 50s overbuilt military spec. They don't mean
oh, for
current
sure.
military spec. That because like when you look, it's I always anytime someone says military spec, the first thing I think of is not military. I think of old school high watts, like
Oh
the
yeah,
internal
yeah, yeah,
wiring of a high watt. Holy shit.
yeah. Those things are amazing.
Like, yeah, if you think your pedal board is wired neatly, go look at the inside of a vintage high watt.
Yeah.
And then go back to the drawing board.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I tell you what, John, we are approaching the end of this episode. We've actually crossed time, which is great because that means the conversation was good. And this is actually one of the more gear centric podcasts I ever do. It's like
All right.
this podcast is very much stories and hey, we're gonna maybe talk about gear.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it'll possibly happen. But no, this has been great. I really enjoy hearing all of this, and we're gonna go talk some more over on the Patreon episode about gear and nerdiness and I want to talk some more about the business a little bit and just hear
Sure.
your take on it because especially anyway there's a lot I can relate to. But before we do that, I joked in my last episode that yeah I'm not Blake Weiland over at the Tone Mob, who I greatly respect and stole most of the format of my show from. um but I do want to I have started adding like a question at the end of the episode just to have a like a final parting thing. I don't care what your favorite boss pedal is though, or pizza. um so what I'm going to ask is we are all gear hoarders. We know it. We are all addicts at this. You wouldn't have gotten into it if you weren't an absolute gear addict. So we've always got something that's like we're looking at that like, oh yeah, I'm going to buy that next.
Mm-hmm.
What's next on your gas list? What are you looking at?
Let's see. I kind of preempted the question by saying that the second I've been literally pestering Chris Benson about this, the second I can get my hands on a Benson. Um, but no, I think for me, the next thing that I really I want is a good Telecaster.
Hmm.
Like just so I've got a G&L ASAT that I absolutely love, but there was a Telecaster that one of our dealers, Heyday Music in Asheville, North Carolina, great shop. Uh, just like a cool, like small, intimate space in the downtown
Yeah.
area. I've never been to Asheville, by the way. Just a lovely town. I go visit
It,
Hawker periodically. Um, but they have like a Tele Deluxe, with the neck humbucker in it, done up with Lawlers. It's black with a maple neck. Like that's one of those guitars you can just be buried with.
yeah.
It would be a nice counterpoint to all of my weird aluminum stuff. Um, as much as I love like the Travis Beans and that sort of thing, sometimes you
Yeah.
just want a telly. So I got to follow my heart on that one. I think if not that guitar, then there will be one in my future. I think it's pretty likely.
Yeah, very. It's that's always a very solid one. I have been quoted as say, despite being y'all, I almost made an entire episode without mentioning this. I'm a Gibson fanboy. I just am. I still think the Telecaster is the perfect guitar, even though that's not like my choice because
Hmm.
I don't necessarily play perfect things. But I think Fender nailed it the first time.
They sure
That
did.
whole bridge pickup, the way it is, just slab body, simple neck. It's perfect. Literally, if I wanted and had to, which thankfully neither one of those things are true, I could own just one Telecaster and do anything I wanted to do.
Yeah, yeah. And if
Yeah,
you're gonna get a second guitar, since you mentioned Gibson, I have a 1991 Les Paul Studio. That's one of the shop guitars because it just it's a very aggressive, like super high output pickup Les Paul,
yeah.
and it just like you hear stuff with that guitar, like it kind of, if you want to really slam a pedal and make sure it's handling hot signals, like that's the one to test with. It's like a big part of the R&D arsenal.
Those '90s studios were better guitars than they deserve to be.
Hundred
I feel
percent.
like that. I feel like that fell off in the 2000s. It
Oh, they
wasn't
sure,
quite the
yeah.
same. But the '90s studios were something special, and I don't think that's just nostalgia speaking.
Oh
I
no,
can't promise. Again, it's all in my head anyway.
it
So
was before they started chambering the bodies on the studios.
yeah,
That was a big part of it. That's another. I All my guitars weigh too much. That's another reason why I think a Telly might be
yeah.
good
When
for
you
me.
said it weighs like 11 or 12 pounds, I was
Yeah.
like, man, Hartley Peavy's going. Oh, that's heavy.
Yeah, well, I have a T60, so that guitar weighs a
Oh
million
God.
pounds. So let's see. I've got the Travis Bean Standard, which is very heavy. I've got
Yes.
the 90s Studio, that's heavy. I've got the Obstructures, which is literally just a slab of aluminum. And I've got the T60, which is just solid swamp ash all the way through.
Yeah.
Um, you know, I've been joking that I'm gonna turn 50 and have to sell all these and get a Parker Fly or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're not gonna even be able to stand up straight anymore at that point
Hmm.
from these guitars. It's like for you bassists, y'all are laughing, but it's like strapping on a 5-string Stingray all the time. I had a 5-string Stingray, and that was easily the heaviest guitar I've
Oh yeah,
ever held
those
for a
things
long
weigh.
period of time.
Those are boat anchors. Um,
Yeah, they absolutely are.
Actually, you know what? I might need to amend my question.
Oh,
I need a mic stand.
yeah, you do. You do need a mic stand. That might be your next gear pick. Uh,
My arm's tired.
for the listeners, John has been holding his microphone this entire time, because his microphone is back at the shop. So
Yeah,
his stand is over at the shop.
yeah.
So
I could really use a desktop one. That's on me. That's on me though.
well, that's awesome. Well, we're gonna go over to Patreon and take a quick little break so that John can give his arm some rest before he ends up with like Popeye biceps here. Um, but you've had luckily your arms have had all that training from these heavy guitars, so
Yeah,
you're fine. You'll be good.
exactly.
Yeah. So in the meantime, y'all, we'll be back next week, or I'll be back next week. You can find all of the links for John's stuff down below, all of the socials, the website, the whole 9 yards. Click those. Go check them out. Go check out all of the pedals, all the really rad stuff. And tomorrow, when this episode airs, go check out the new pedal and buy one because that sounds super rad. You said loud as hell, so you had me there.
Oh yeah.
Um, but in the meantime, y'all, be good to yourselves, be kind to each other, and make some noise.
Cheers.